Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. Today's episode is brought to you by Fox Studios Costumes. And today's guest is quite interesting to me. I'm very excited to talk to her. Susan Lyall has what I would call a very eclectic resume as far as costume designers go. She has worked with many writer-directors, auteurs like David Mamet, Steven Soderbergh, and of course, she's working now with Aaron Sorkin. Well, she has a film out. She has made Meeting the Ricardos with Aaron Sorkin, which I was blown away by her work. So please welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast, costume designer Susan Lyall. Susan, thank you for being here.
Thank you for interviewing me.
Well, I gotta say, I mean, as I said just now, I love your resume because one of the first things on it, and I don't know what this says about me, I was a huge Dream On fan. I love Martin Tupper was like my hero in the early 90s, and Brian Benben was the man, and I just love that you worked on that show, and it's one of the first things that you did. You'd work for Todd Solondz first. Solondz?
Yes.
That was your Solondz fear, anxiety, and depression. And he, of course, again, another writer-director who has a very eclectic filmography. You did that, and then soon after you were working on Dream On. So I got to ask, did you like working on Dream On?
Dream On was very important to me because it was the first work I had done in Los Angeles. And I didn't really understand. Let me go back. It was one of the first. It was the first time I'd actually worked in Hollywood, and I had been an assistant costume designer, and I got an interview for that show, and the production manager asked me, "Well, listen, would you consider being an assistant costume designer?" I didn't have very much experience, and I somehow said, "No, I want to be the costume designer." And he sort of shrugged his shoulders, and eventually I did get the job. I had to interview with John Landis, who was the executive producer, I believe. And then it was a deal. And I don't know where I got. Sometimes when you're young, you can be brave like that, and then you have a dip, and you get less brave, and then you get older and you get braver again. I don't know. So maybe one is born from naivete and one is born from experience. But it is important to just sort of say what you would like it to be. And I never looked back after that. It was really, really great, that experience of working on Dream On. I learned a lot, and believe it or not, my assistant was Mark Bridges. That's just a little tidbit there. And I joined the Costume Designers Guild shortly thereafter, and it was also because I was in Los Angeles. That's when I first met Jodie Foster, at an interview somehow. You just never know who that might connect you. And it was a very interesting moment in my career. Also, by the way, because it was, I don't know, 1990 or 1989, I'm not sure, but I had a full year where I worked with all women directors. And there were several women directors on Dream On, and I also worked with Mira Nair and started to work with Jodie Foster, all in 1 year.
Again, all amazing talents as well.
Yeah.
And you worked on Little Man Tate, which, if memory serves, was Jodie Foster's directorial debut.
That's right.
And
Yes.
I've been a huge fan of Jodie Foster all the way back to when I was a kid and saw Candle Shoe. It was before, which was a Disney movie she did. And of course,
Yes.
I've of course there's Taxi Driver and everything else, but for me, my affection for Jodie Foster began in a Disney movie. But I thought very accomplished director. You went on to work with her again on movies like Flight Plan and Nell, and in addition to working with Michael Apted.
Yeah, I've worked with Jodie. I think we've done 6 or 7 movies together. I think acted, I've done at least four or five movies with him. I do get some repeat business.
Yeah,
It's
apparently
really
with some. Now I'm
yeah.
curious. I think that the costume design is a interesting apex in the film business because you're dealing with the director, you're dealing with actors, and you're dealing with the production designer and the director of photography. You all have to work synergistically, and obviously, actors, of course, the first thing you want them to do. I've often said to people that some of the most important keys that you hire on a film are your hair and makeup people and your costume designer, because your actors have to feel great. That's your first line of defense to keep your actors happy. But what is that like for you when you come onto a project for the first time? Do you begin with the script? Do you begin with your cast? Do you begin with the talking with the director? How does the process begin?
Well, each film has its own unique DNA, but of course, everyone starts with the script.
Mm.
Sometimes you might just know you're going to work with the director no matter what. That this has happened with Michael Apted, I think, with Extreme Measures. I didn't read the script because it was secretive before I said, yeah, I'm going to do it, sure. So that was sort of an interesting moment. I had to interview with Hugh Grant and Elizabeth Hurley, and I hadn't read the script because anyway. But that was a case where I had worked with him a few times, and I would work with him no matter what he was doing. So that was a case where director first. Steven Soderbergh, sometimes you don't know what he's got up in his brain. Oh, it's going to be on an iPhone. Okay. There's a few pages here and there. Okay. I worked on a film, Clear History, that Greg Mottola directed with Larry David, and there was no real script. There were these pages of paragraphs of describing what would happen, and it had a scene number, just because you have to have a scene number just to know the scheduling.
Right. What are we shooting today?
Some structure. So that was pretty interesting. You didn't, because everything was just ad lib. So there was a description of what should happen in the scene, and then it was up to the actors to make that happen. And I hadn't really worked on like that before. So so technically we're starting with the script, but the script is a series of paragraphs, and then you just have to adjust a little bit. And when an Aaron Sorkin script is locked, it means exactly what it says.
Like a playwright, you don't. It's sacrosanct. You don't touch it.
Dot dot dot. That means, he will stop and say, I believe there was a comma there, and then he will also, he says, I might get a call to say, are there pockets in her robe? He did ask me this on Being the Ricardos. If Nicole Kidman's, one of her robes had pockets in them, because he doesn't give a lot of notes to me, as long as he responds really more to ideas and fitting photographs and inspiration photos and things like that. He'll respond to a visual. He will rarely give a note, like certainly not a specific note. Like he will not say much more than boxy suit, skinny tie. He'll say something like that perhaps, but this was unusual because he was concerned that it had pockets. And in fact, it did have pockets, and I said it had pockets. And I realized that when Aaron is thinking and walking and pacing, he's always got his hands in his pockets. And the scene of Nicole, it was around the swimming pool, and he wanted to make sure that she could walk and pace with her hands in the pockets. And I think I mentioned that to her, and I noticed that she puts her hands in her pockets a lot as Lucille Ball. I don't know if that stems from that, but certainly all of her costumes could accommodate that, at least many of them.
Well, I'm curious, like, you worked on a film that I think has sort of become a cult movie for people of a certain age, which was Alan Moyle's Empire Records. I've watched Empire Records. I can't even, I don't even want to admit to you how many times I watched that movie. But you jumped from working with Jodie Foster on Nell into an Empire Records, which is completely diametrically opposed. I mean, in terms of subject matter, is that
Mhm.
something that you find easy to do? Do you take each project, on its own? Are you able to compartmentalize because of the diversity of the kind of projects you've worked on?
I quite like having the projects all be really diverse. It makes your brain work in a different way, and every film has something you will learn. You will learn something new in your for your toolbox. And I can't say that I calculated a lot of those career choices. I think that I had met Alan Moyle before and hadn't worked with him, and I I don't actually know how that. Sometimes I remember how the connection happened, but that one I don't know. But we had this great second meeting. We'd met on another film and it didn't work out, but this time we just clicked, and it was a lot of fun to do. But it wasn't that successful a movie when it came out.
No.
It's just and if you don't want to dissect it too much, but it's fun, that movie.
Well,
And
plus the costumes, I think, the way it was, I mean, it was obviously very contemporary when it was made, but
yes,
the great characters and the actors that were great in it, and it was so much fun your work in particular was a lot of fun.
I
And it's
think
especially fun to revisit now.
yes, I have, now I have a 24-year-old son who thinks it's really great. And when I tell certain people that I did that film, there's kind of this glassiness that passes over their eyes, and they just can't believe it. And so we didn't know that at the time that it would be that, but I felt very close to it because it's been over 25 years, because I know, because I there was a 25th anniversary, whatever. I know it's more than 25 years ago. And I
26 years.
okay, put it that way. And then
Almost
uh,
27.
but back then, I was in my early 30s. I wasn't that removed from the age group. I was still able to identify with it. I had been living in New York for a long time. I was very into music. You know, I used to even have a band called the Band of Susans. I was very comfortable with records and record stores and music, and having you know, I someone once asked me if I did research for that movie. I I I don't have to do research sometimes for that kind of movie. I know what it's I know what kids roaming record stores. I know what they look like, and I lived in the East Village, and I had my studio in Soho, which of course is impossible to believe now, but it was so cheap you could do that.
Right.
And that was where we did our fittings, in the basement of this building on Wooster Street. And everyone was young and fun, young and fun, uh, and it was one of those things. And I know other costume designers must talk about this. Is that it's that when you do a film where it's one story day, and you have to find that look that carries you the whole movie, and it is quite it becomes kind of a group project almost. Everyone gets in on the decision,
Sure.
and for better or worse. And it was a very sort of I don't know, it was like young and fast moving and fun music. And uh, the kids were always up to something. They did Pilates every morning, and, and they would just we had a choreographer who would they would start with Pilates, and no one even knew what they were practically back then. It was 1994 when we were filming it, and and they were all on the cusp of their own greatness, but not quite there yet. So uh, there was still sort of a youthful innocence, and it was hard not to be really charmed by it, honestly.
Well, that's an interesting I never thought about that, but a 1 day film where you might be shooting it over 4 or 5 weeks or something, but you have to have the same wardrobe. What kind of are there secrets to that in terms of colors that work better, fabrics that work better, and like how many of the same costume would you have to make for a film like that?
Yes, I mean, because we were, I don't know, a little bit, I don't know. There weren't that many doubles. Okay, it was really, we were
Budget
a
too,
little
yes.
bit, yeah, just a little bit the seat of the pants kind of thing, and not everybody's in every scene every day, so you could keep things in rotation, but uh, it is, now when you do a 1 day film and the bigger budget that you end up having so many, you just, so many multiples. I'm currently, I'm here in London doing Luther, the film version of Luther.
By the way, can we just say how cool that is?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm
It's
really
pretty
happy.
cool.
Yeah, but I the tweed coat that he wore at the end of season 5, is quite threadbare and you know, cannot be used anymore. But I've through quite an extensive process of finding the correct mill in the Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Lewis, we have managed to have them weave the correct fabric again, and we're going to end up with over 20 coats for him because he has so many stunt doubles and he goes through a lot.
Well, since you brought that up, Luther's one of the coolest TV series, the last 20 years, and Idris Elba's arguably one of the coolest actors. It took me a while to even know he was British because I saw him first on The Wire as Stringer Bell, and when I heard him with a British accent, I'm like, wait, what? But when you're working on something like Luther, does it excite you? Like, do you ever get to be? Were you ever a fan of something? Like, were you a fan of the Luther TV show? And if so, do you get intimidated when you're like going to now take on the mantle of kind of something that has a little bit of a legendary status to it?
I was a fan of the show. I was a little bit terrified by it as well. So when it first came out, I watched the first season of it, but I didn't really I couldn't, it was really hard. And I kind of let it go. When this came along, of course, I had already worked with Idris on Molly's Game.
Yep.
We played, yeah. So I had that relationship. And I really wanted to work in the UK. And I really would have wanted to do Luther. I really did. I wanted to do the super cold Luther.
Did you and Idris talk about it before it happened? Did he no?
Mm-mm.
Because
No, I know he knew. Well, I'm sure he was told, but when he came in for his fitting, I'm sure he didn't remember. And I was wearing my mask, and I said, we worked together before, and I had pull your mask down. So, and then we had, of course, then we, knew each other, and he is one of the greats, and we don't talk that much. We don't have to.
right.
I know what Luther's wearing, so for him, his process, he doesn't really want to talk to a lot of people during the day, in
Sure.
the morning, and everything. So it's great. I just make sure that the dresser is in place, and that everything's. Has he got the same thing today? How many stab wounds today? It's more like that. It's more where are we in the script exactly? So that's it. That's one of those things of when you have one continuity day or two continuity days, you really need to know where you are, because if you're not, we shoot this in particular, we're so out of order all the time. You really have to know exactly where you are, because it's almost minute by minute. Money Monster was a bit like that too. It's almost in live time, in a way. By the time the delivery man walks into that television studio, it's a ticking time bomb, literally. So it's 45 minutes, and the movie is going along almost tick 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 in the same. It's almost like Lifetime. Anyway, that's just it's just another one of those examples of that.
Well, I'm excited. I mean, it's exciting that you're working on that. But I want to go back to somebody that even I, like, if I would be terrified to work with David Mamet. I'm a huge fan of David Mamet. I find him incredibly intimidating because of what the kind of writer he is and how great he is. And you worked on a movie that is so wonderful. And by the way, I think the costume design in the film really adds to the whole mise en scène of it all, which is The Spanish Prisoner. And what a wonderful film, what wonderful work you did. How did you find yourself working with Mamet? Because you went on and worked with him on State and Maine, and were you scared of him?
That's sort of the truth of the matter, is that David Mamet, he can be a little scary, but mostly he is incredibly friendly, tells really dumb jokes, and says goody goody gumdrops all the time. Goody goody gumdrops. He really says that, and it's not ironic or anything. He says it all the time, and he loves clothing. He loves clothing, and he loves to talk about it, and he particularly loves hunting and fishing clothing from the 1940s and 1950s, and he loves to sort of, if he could, he would just have all the same costumes moved around onto all of his favorite actors. He, puts the same actors in his movies, and then he could just put the costumes around. I mean, couldn't be happier. He's very happy on a film set. He loves the camaraderie, and he's really wonderful to work with. And he actually likes to talk about, the width of a placket and the types of fabrics, and he really can. He can really go deep, but he can also give a direction like, he runs into a townsman, and you can say, well, what kind of townsman is that? And he'll say, well, it's a medium townsman. And you're like, I think I know what you mean. So you don't always have to, many of these directors, most directors, in fact, they can't give a specific thing, a specific direction, but they can give you a reference or an emotion that they hope to feel when they see the character. So that's something I can help with. And I end up we talk character all the time, more than actual clothing. It's more, what kind of person it is. And that is a huge part of being a costume designer. And I know that my colleagues would agree with that, is that we spend a lot of time observing people and knowing people and learning about the world and imagining everybody that you see. I mean, I sit on the subway and I can, look across at someone and I could create a whole backstory if I wanted to, because I have to do that all the time. So many times in a script you get these characters, they may have one line or they're, they just need some kind of identity, and there's nothing written. It will be, I have a character in this script that says middle-aged Asian woman. And what am I going to do with that? So I have to make, I'm like, okay, she's doing a fellowship in orthodontia. I don't know. It's just something, I give them something. And, and I look at, there's more attention, not more attention, but more script description of the kind of car they're driving. And I thought, okay, family sedan. Okay, what do I do with that? So you sort of, you're like, I always joke, we're the thread detectives. We sort of thread our story and with clothing and find things just to, we can ask the director, or most directors I work with are much happier if I just present them something like, I know there's nothing written here, so I've decided that this person is a this, or you could have this. And they're always like, great, what do you want? Which one do you want? So
wow,
it's very satisfying on that. Those are smaller parts, of course. But.
Well, again, it's so strange because, you go working with David Mamet and then you work on another film that I also think, like Empire Records, totally different, but it certainly has a bit of a cult status. I know I've probably watched it 5 or 6 times. The Mothman Prophecies. I mean, that's a movie, man. I got to tell you, that is a genuinely scary, creepy film. And I know it's set in the real world, and you're dealing with but when you it seemed different than the other things that you'd worked on. Like now you're directing this, or you're not directing, you're the costume designer, but you're working with Mark Pellington, who is I think a great director of thrillers, and that film, there even now it really holds up. So did you ever want to do what's ostensibly a horror film?
No, I definitely didn't know what I was exactly getting into there. I do know that they had another costume designer who something happened and they couldn't do it, and I interviewed, over the phone, because it was 2000, and that's what you didn't have a Zoom or anything, and I kind of was hired right away.
Had you read the script? 'Cause you said
Yes,
you didn't know.
I had read the script.
Okay, you read the script.
I didn't, we Mark Pellington and I hit it off right away, because we had he's directed some of the great music videos of all time, but
Yep.
he's also, we just had this great connection, and we had strong, as it turns out, we found out later, strong personal connection to my downstairs neighbor, and just coincidence stuff that happens in life. So I did not know that I have to be quite frank. I didn't understand how scary it was. He did. He knew how spooky it was, and I knew, what I had to do. And he has very, very good taste, and it has its own elegance, and it has its own sort of humility with the people who live in the town, and the Laura Linney character, and he's sort of very respectful, but he always wanted to think about the bigger question, and he's just a very soulful person, and that kind of exudes from him, and he's one of those people that actually makes you better. Some directors just have that. They might ask for something that's a little hard to do, and just because something's hard, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It means maybe you should do it, and maybe it will make you better, and it almost always, you will use that information later somehow. It's really, he was like that. I think he made the people around him better.
When you're working on a film like that, and it's supposed to be spooky, would that alter, say, the kinds of fabrics that you would choose to use? In terms of, would that be a time when you would talk to the production designer and the DP about the color palette of what they were going for? Because if memory serves, it's kind of desaturated in the film, and would that affect just how you would approach the film in your own work?
I think more than fabrics per se, it was more about color and texture, which I guess is fabric, but it was the spooky element and the dark silhouettes, and were all definitely discussed, and lighting references came from certain paintings and so on, but where you would have a focus point of a color in a light, a light source of some, whether it was the moon or whatever it was. That's it. It was very. There were some fashion photographs that we used as reference, just to, sort of the darks. You'd have the dark surround, a light focus, and a dash of color in there somehow, and we would strive for that, and we would achieve it too occasionally. But when you are designing, if you're aiming for one particular location and one particular setup, your character is going to do a lot of other things. So you can't even if it's perfect and it's beautiful in this one beautifully lit glass house, then they're going to leave and walk in front of a red brick wall, and then they're going to get in a car, and then they're going to be at the ocean, and then so you have to sort of make sure it carries the whole way. Although sometimes it's great to just anchor it in the most important portion of that costume's journey. I feel like I always I break it down every script by the character. So I'm writing their story. When I can have my fitting, I can tell the actor exactly where they are in the, that's after you've been to see your grandmother in the care home, and now you're on your way to visit a detective or something, whatever it is.
But I love that the idea of a costumes journey within the film. That's a really fascinating idea. I've never thought about that before, but you're absolutely right.
And there's a lot of that in Being the Ricardos, actually, because of the specificity of the days and knowing how the week is going and the progression. When we on the first day at the table read, and they walk in together, Lucy and Desi, they are together. They're a unit. They just look beautiful. Their clothes are the same color. They move around through their environments. They are right there. And her beautiful dressing room, which is beautifully designed by John Hutman. He's very blue, and there was some talk of she also has on her second day wears this quite bright blue vest and trousers, and how much time would she be in that environment? And she's in it briefly, but that color on that second day was more important to carry through the dressing room and the writer's room and at different places. It was better to have it be stronger, and it's a big day for her. She had a lot to say, and it was kind of a boss outfit. So that's where I chose to put it, and that is absolutely intentional and discussed and decided based on all of the script and the production design. And Aaron and Nicole are fine with this. They like to know why you've decided to do it that way, and you have to explain your choice. And usually everyone's fine with it. So it's particularly satisfying when that happens. It was a very satisfying job being the Ricardos. It really sort of looked how I imagined it, and it just worked very well.
Oh no, it's great. And one of the things, in addition to Aaron, it's interesting to see Aaron Sorkin, how he's now transitioned very quickly to being one of the A-list directors in Hollywood. Not that he wasn't already an A-list creator, but I was very excited to see Molly's Game, because being a long time Sorkin fan, I even actually I was in Hawaii at the Kahala, staying at the Kahala, and I was with some friends. We were all there after working on this big project, and he's walking up the beach, and I go, I just finished watching the first 4 seasons of The West Wing because it had just come out on DVD, and I go, that's Aaron Sorkin. And I went up to him and introduced myself and said, hey, I was with some people that he might want to talk to. So he did. He came over and hung out. And I was very impressed by the fact that he talked to somebody. He didn't know me. But Molly's Game was a really assured debut. And I thought another thing about that film was I thought the costume design really worked, especially not just because you talked about telling a story. Jessica Chastain's outfits in that film told her story. I mean, they were very important to telling us who and what she was and where she was in her life. And I thought that was really interesting. And you said he's very specific about his scripts, but when obviously making his first movie was really important, and she was so front and center, so the costumes were really vital in that film, even though it wasn't necessarily ostentatious. But what was it like working on that particular movie? And again, did you work with both, Aaron Sorkin and Jessica Chastain, and how did you come up with that look? Because it was based on a real person. So were you going back and did you consult with Molly herself, the real Molly?
Yes. Yes. When I
Sorry, that was a million questions in one. I
that was
apologize.
more than one question. But here's something that I underestimated. I read the script. I read it twice or three times maybe before I actually met him. And so I flew from New York. I'm New York based, by the way, which has a lot to do with my career choices, because it's what comes along in New York, which is different than what
Right.
comes along in. But anyway, I met with Aaron, and actually, I was hired in the interview. He said, "So are you going to do the film?" And this is pretty unusual, but it does happen. And I was sort of blinking and thinking, "Oh my God, okay." I'm like, "Yeah," and and then I went and started to break it down properly, and I realized that Jessica Chastain had 90 changes. Okay, 90. And one thing that Aaron said to me in the course of the interview was that Molly Bloom made a point of never wearing the same thing twice in front of her players. In other words, she knew she must have kept her own spreadsheet of this, of what to wear. But he literally wanted every costume to be different. So that the reason there are 90 changes is because there are so many story days. I mean, there are these passage of time that just, it just zings past. And that is a very Sorkinian device of telling a story, is like time moves on through 15 card games, or whatever it is. And so part of her allure as a host of these games was that she was quite glamorous, and assets were front and center, and that was based on the real person. And it is a very sexy look, and very, especially in the period of the 90s, it was the birth of the Kardashian aesthetic. And bronzer and incredibly body conscious clothing, and using that aesthetic, we went through an awful lot of tight dresses, and they were specifically placed here and there, depending on what was expected to be accomplished in the scene. And there, of course, are a few times she's at home in pajamas and t-shirts, and there's a few times she's, with her friends in a bar, and so on. But most of the time it was hosting games, and it just added up to that number. And I honestly, so it's the opposite of the one story day movie, is the 90 story day movie.
Well, on a day like that, I mean, on a movie like that, do you look at that? Is that something you relish? Because, and do you get to design those dresses from scratch, or did you go back and get, I guess, 90s vintage, or how did that work for you as a designer? It sounds like something like that would be fun, but also maybe a pain in the ass.
It was it was an awful lot of clothing to get together, and it starts late 90s, and she's younger, but then it goes into the 2000s, and then you can there are lots of places you can get that. Very little was made. Most of it was sourced either from, there's plenty of rental houses and places for high fashion styling that you can rent from. In New York has a couple of them. They don't always rent to movies, but they would rent to me for certain, for longer term, just because I was interested in the stuff that was a little older. There are ways to do it, and also that I had to find my way to create 3 stages in that film, which is sort of her early life as a professional, ski racer, and arriving in Los Angeles, to the early days of her before she got control of her own game in LA, and then when she got control in LA, and then her New York portion. I kind of created the three categories, and Erin agreed with me, so did Jessica, and we used it as the guideline also for her hair and makeup changes and wig changes and so on. We kind of, had an A, B, and C, and sometimes you have to just create these rules in the universe of the character progression. You just have to make some rules and stick to them. And they're subtle to the audience perhaps, but they're ironclad to us. And it keeps you organized, and it keeps the look fluid, the way it should be, so that you're not jumping around, and it's important. And I have found that you start that way. It's almost like preparing for an exam or something. It's like studying and getting it in your head, and then you won't get lost, and you will know where you are for your actor when it's a particularly dense story like that.
Well, another thing I loved about that movie was Idris Elba's suits. And I mean, you go back and you watch The Wire and you watch the progression of his character, Stringer Bell. I always thought that Idris Elba's got to be a guy that is very conscious of his clothing, because in The Wire, when he tried to go on the straight and narrow, or at least start a business, his clothing changes in the series, and it's great. But when you see him in that movie, he's looking very distinguished. I mean, he's impeccably dressed. Was his character also based on the real character? And did you work together coming up with that look? Or was that just your typical New York high-powered lawyer look? Because I love the way he looks in that film in terms of his clothing.
It's interesting you should say that, because really, Idris is Aaron, okay, in that movie. That's Aaron when he first met Molly and started to interview her and learn her story. He's just like the lawyer character, basically. He's asking the questions and getting the answers, and the more he learns and the more he understands of Molly, the more he sees the hero. And so truthfully, that character is Aaron. And then when I asked Aaron, do you have, okay, he's a very high-powered New York lawyer. What, obviously he should be suited. And he said, well, when I get suits at Armani, well, they actually come and they help me. And I thought,
of course they do.
Armani, yeah, of course they do. But so everyone has their point of reference. Okay. So he knows that that's a beautiful suit, and you will never go wrong with this beautiful kind of, what's wrong with beautiful Italian tailoring? So we, and I agree. And so it was meant to be very elegant and very moneyed. When Idris first arrived, he went, his process in a fitting, and I know this, having just gone through the Luther thing again, he goes through a whole bunch of ideas first, and we go through them and we test them and we try them, and then he comes back around somewhere usually. It's just how some actors like to do it. You need to, you give your idea, and they need some ideas, and then you work it, you come around, usually you get them back to your idea. But it's important that people are heard, and also it's important because they are experts in their character. So they are going to give you some other hint. We just sit there and, like I said, the detective work of picking up your hints from
the thread detective.
The thread detective, and
that's got to be the title of your memoir when you go back and you write the book about the history of.
I think it's going to be called "It's All in the Hunt." No, but that's Idris was, of course, a pleasure, and this also happens a lot though, which is he flew in from. He was in Thailand or something. He had been on this thing where he was boxing. It was some show that he had signed up for where you can do anything if you spend 10,000 hours boxing it or something. And he had done kickboxing or something. So he came in, he was thin as a rail and muscular, of course. And he had gone from that to suddenly arriving in Toronto, coming into our fitting room. I was like, well, hello, here we go. You know, and we had to work through his look, and we had to film him the next day practically. So we had to work fast.
Well, now, before I go back, get closer into Ricardos, I got to ask you about working with Steven Soderbergh, because you worked on two of his thrillers, which I own both of these movies, and I love Side Effects. I think Side Effects is a great film. And then you worked on Unsane, which was famously, I think it was the first film he shot on an iPhone.
Right.
And what was it like working with him as a director? And secondly, I've talked to a lot of costume designers about the transition from film to digital capture technology, digital, not just HD, but filming digitally. Was that, first of all, what was it like working with Soderbergh first, I guess? And again, he's somebody who he's his own director of photography, and he's obviously a writer, an auteur. What was it like working with him, and was it different than, saying, working with a Mamet or working with Aaron Sorkin?
Working with Steven is very different than all of those other directors. I also worked with Steven in 1991 on King of the Hill, which he at that time had a cinematographer. And
beautiful movie, by the way.
It's a great movie. It holds up really well, I think. And I remember him saying to me on that film, some conversation about, why do you always have to do a master and then over the shoulder and then over the shoulder? And he just didn't, even as early as that, he was questioning, why do you have to do everything this certain way? So, and he certainly on that film, which period film, I asked him about the little boy, and if he had anything in mind. And Steven was sitting there. He said, well, he should wear shorts. And it was a hot summer day in St. Louis, and Steven was wearing shorts and maybe high top sneakers. And Steven was wearing high top sneakers. So, we all put a little bit of ourselves into everything. And so, anyway, then he moved to Los Angeles. I was still in New York, and we didn't work together again until Side Effects.
Mm-hmm.
And by then he was his own DP, and he had, he done this vast body of work since then. And it was really great to reunite with him. And when you work with him, he responds. He's also someone who responds very well to images and very short emails. And if you write them too long, he won't answer. And and he's worked with a lot of different costume designers, so he knows a lot about it, but he also gives you a long leash. And same with, actually, so does Aaron Sorkin. Long leash doesn't let you get tangled, and I really appreciate that. They sort of trust you as a department head to deliver a really great product, I guess you could say, and we'll give you a note if something's gone awry, and hopefully you just keep feeding the information so that that no one's surprised. That's really important. But then I also so it was quite a different level of experience by the time I worked with him again, and we both had gone on for 20 years, whatever, of making movies, and then together again. And then we also did this I don't know what you call it exactly, but this crime series called Mosaic for
Hmm.
HBO Max, which is where you sort of pick your own path as you go along, which is, you know, you can,
It was a very, very interesting, I guess, experiment. I enjoyed it.
yeah. And so, I seem to, uh, I got to do that, which was, I didn't know how to do that. And Unsane, so because uh, like say a script is 130 pages or something. The script for Mosaic was like 450 pages, but a lot of it was exactly the same. And then you'd have the B, if the A pod or the B pod.
Yeah.
So the continuity, it was and it would be from a character's, might be slightly different point of view of what happened, depending on the character, which character's point of view it was. The clothing didn't really change, but it just was another thing. And then on Sane, on an iPhone, with
Yeah, I
this
mean,
little,
and it wasn't even it wasn't even it was what, an iPhone 7, I think. And
and
the resolution isn't even up to what it is now. Did you have, when you were doing something like that, were you limited in terms of the kind of fabrics and colors you could use because of the reproduction of the camera?
yes, I felt quite limited, and I very importantly, I was said, okay, it is only ever going to be on an iPhone, right? I mean, that's the size of the screen, right? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. And of course, it was released,
In theaters.
yeah. And so it's 40 feet tall. And luckily, you know what? It doesn't really change. My method doesn't really change, but you can get a little away with a little bit more if it's just on an iPhone, I think. But as it turns out, you really need to just assume everything will be seen head to toe, 40 feet, just to be safe. So, he's and he's up to something else now too. But anyway, he is very inventive, and he he is a problem solver, and can condense and simplify complicated transitions and scenes into a long, slow shot with voiceover. We can combine all three scenes and end on the person speaking. We just listen to them watching another person. He's very good at that, and uh, he's so fast. He is the fastest director I've ever worked with. I mean, you're barely finished dressing extras, and we're going to wrap. I mean, it's fantastic. It's a it's a very unusual experience working with him, and I wish it was more the standard, to be frank. It's really,
Well, I think I would be remiss now that sort of comic book movies dominate the cinematic landscape. You actually worked on a few.
yes.
And people forget that Red was based on a DC comic,
Mhm.
and R.I.P.D. was sort of an offshoot of the Hellboy universe that Dark Horse
Right.
published, and these were sort of precursors to where we're at now. But you still got to work on these films, and I'm curious, a costume designer coming into a comic book world, did you
Yeah.
change your methodology? Did you look at the comics for inspiration, or did you sort of set them, keep the costuming, the idea behind it? I mean, RIPD is different than Red. I mean, Red's an action thriller,
Right.
but RIPD is a supernatural police force
Right.
agency. So, what was it like for you to jump into the comic book world?
I Okay. There is something quite liberating about that when you here again you can decide the rules of the universe. So RIPD, no matter what happens to Jeff Bridges or
Ryan Reynolds?
Ryan Reynolds, they never get dirty. Their clothes don't rip. Whatever. There's just nothing happens to them. So
Right.
that's just the rule of the universe, and we decided that we don't. It doesn't have to be explained. It just it's just the facts. And audiences will just accept that. And the sort of purgatory, the rest in peace, the rest in police department, that sort of purgatory place between hell and death and hell or whatever. Making police officers from every era was just it was unbelievably fun. That was really fun. And even if there was, only one police woman in 1910 in Boston or wherever, we made her bad, and so she was in purgatory. It was very, very. We really had free reign, and would just Robert, Robert Schwenke would just he was thrilled with everything. He just that's where you can just pour ideas in, and ideas they are certainly a currency, but they're also just ideas. If they don't work, just talk. Okay, fine. It's just an idea. It's like, and we were just constantly inventing police who lived in this hell or whatever, pre-hell, and then there were these deados. That was no one could quite. We couldn't quite figure out what they were, and so we were always creating new types of people just to be deados and watch them explode into whatever. And there is something like, you can just do whatever just do something, like decide on something and see if it works with whoever the actor that walks in the door. And there would be some guidelines, like, sweet old lady or something like that, and you would have something to go on, but that it's a lot of fun and it's liberating, and that's another one of those. They wear just one costume the whole time because they're not even alive. So, right. And that I definitely was inspired by the comic book or graphic novel, I guess, for Jeff Bridges' character. It did have to have a Western element to it, but I sort of thought he should just look like a cop too. So, navy blue, buttons popping out, and the silhouette of a Old West gunslinger, and actually high-heeled Western boots. That really, for some reason, the boots were a touchstone for Jeff. He really liked that, and same with Ryan. We just had to find that moment, because he dies on the job, right? You see him, a little bit with his wife. So you see a little bit of him on his human side, and then and you have to be careful what he dies in, because he's going to wear that forever. So, and then, Mary Louise Parker in that is really, funny, and we kind of went for a late 60s feel. We could do anything. There's nothing in the script there, and that character is an invented character, wasn't in the comic book. So that is kind of inventive, and that is in costume design. Coming up with those ideas, or maybe the big idea, is what I consider to be the most challenging part of it, is finding that and being able to then focus on achieving it. Sometimes, like for Luther, for example, we know what he wears. And so I'm not coming up with the new big idea for Luther. I'm maintaining Luther. And so it's different, Being the Ricardos, when you see the episodes of the show in black and white, I am carefully reconstructing exactly what was in the show. But I am inventing what she is like behind the scenes as a boss and as a woman at that time. And that part is the sort of what I call where you have to find the big idea. And that part is always the most interesting to me.
Now, since we sort of got up to Being the Ricardos, we talked about, before we started this, that you actually have two movies out, Clifford the Big Red Dog and Being the Ricardos, which couldn't be more different than one another. But with Being the Ricardos, obviously you're reteaming for a third time with Aaron Sorkin. Were you a fan of I Love Lucy growing
Oh,
up?
I don't really know any people who weren't.
No,
I mean,
I loved it too.
I don't know. Like, who would those people be? uh, so, so yes, I was a fan, and I liked all of it, and I liked how nothing ever really bad happened. So
Right.
and also, well, what I also like is how in our contemporary lexicon, if we're in some situation and you can say, oh my God, what if this was Lucy? You can imagine, like, you're doing something. What if it's Lucy? So, sorry.
Oh, no worries.
Okay. Let me get back to you.
Could be
Okay.
a director. New job right there.
Well, could be. Oh, darn, I was on that video.
Yeah, I'd
Anyway.
see. The Designing Hollywood podcast prevented you from.
Uh, anyway, I lost my thread.
Well, you were saying everybody. Lucy's part of the popular pop culture lexicon. We all think. I mean, there's so many interesting things about. Like, you're obviously recreating the show as it looks in black and white. Was
Right.
that something that affected the costumes? Like,
Yeah.
and do you have to think, okay, these are black and white costumes, so they have to be different?
Yes. Designing for black and white is quite different. And when you are trying to decipher what a black and white show was in color, that's a whole other thing. I mean, there are all kinds of colorized versions
Right.
that they use some algorithm starting with a carrot orange hair and then make something from that, but that doesn't work. So, for example, the episode that is being rehearsed and that we see a lot in black and white, Lucy's wearing this blouse that's kind of a faded fuchsia mauve color, and the fabric is made, and it's dissected, watching the show over and over and over again, and blowing up this, freezing it, blowing it up, recreating the shapes that are on there, these little amoeba shapes, and then figuring out the scale of the shapes and how close they are together, and then figuring out the colors, and then testing them and making samples. So I don't know what color that blouse was, but we just decided collectively, meaning with the production designer and myself and the cinematographer. I had a sort of a blue and a green, and we had several different shades of that same fabric, and we decided, based on the colors on the set and testing it with just the black and white mono on your iPhone.
Right.
How does it read? How does it read in black and white? So it's quite easy to do that, and then you can. And honestly, they all read very similarly. So we just decided on that because we see it. That one costume you see both in color, in sort of real time, and you see it as an episode. So it traveled between the two color zones. So that was really important, that color, to decipher that. And so that is sort of it's creative, but it's a lot of logistics and technical things to decide how to get there. And it's a process of being able to have fabric made. You need a lot of lead time, and that was really important. And all those decisions have to be made well in advance of filming.
When you're recreating, obviously, period stuff and dealing with real people, I mean, Lucy and Desi obviously are iconic characters of 20th century entertainment. Do you have leeway, or is it more important to recreate things exactly as they were, or can you put your own sort of creative flourish on them? And did you have a favorite designing for Lucy or Desi?
I think that a lot of the photography of both Lucy and Desi that you find, it's very glamorous, and everyone's very well dressed and beautifully made up, and all the jewelry is beautiful. Everything it's glam.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I really wanted to avoid that, uh, and to try to show the real person.
Mm.
And that was really what Aaron wanted to. He was not interested in recreating anything, and he was specifically, except the shows, of course, but he wanted, you know, a fresh take on it. And I used Lucy Arnaz, the daughter, I used her documentary about her parents as kind of a touchstone. And it had a lot of home footage, home movie footage, and some photographs that I really found very useful, to see the woman, and to find an opportunity to show a Lucille Ball that we don't see. And you know, that really was important, was just to show not everything is glamorous and not everything is, you know, Lucy Ricardo, because everyone thinks they are the biggest Lucy Ricardo fan or I Love Lucy fan. I mean, really, legions of people. And it's a character, you know,
Right.
it's a character, and it's a popular character. She was a person, you know, she was, uh, I don't know. I found that I feel like I want to protect her or something. I just, you know, I want people to understand that I learned so much about her in this process, that I didn't know before. Like, you know, I didn't know she was a communist. I didn't know all these things. I hadn't really thought about her being in an interracial marriage, and I hadn't thought about her having children so late in life. That's incredibly modern. and and that was, you know, in the late 40s and early 50s. So kudos to her.
When you're working with actors like Javier Bardem and Nicole Kidman, obviously two very storied, very
Yes.
terrific actors, two of our greatest actors now, when you are working with them to create characters based on real people, was it for them important? Like, do they want the period accuracy to be dead on, or do they want to make sure that that there's a little bit of leeway that can, like, sometimes maybe Lucy's outfits might not necessarily be the most flattering things on Nicole Kidman. So do you work synergistically with those actors to sort of create a hybrid of historical accuracy and then something that looks good for them?
Yes, we do. I think it's important to have historical reference, but I think it's also nice to make it fresh. And you know, there in sort of the 80s and 90s, when you did a period film, everything had to be so accurate, accurate, accurate. And now I feel like it's a little more. You can have a fresher take. I think it's more interesting. It's more fun to watch. Everything in Being the Ricardos could technically be accurate if you really wanted to dissect it, but I the actors mostly want to look great in their outfits, or appropriate, you know, whatever it is. Historical accuracy is important, and they both really took to it. And in, you know, 50s is not, it's not hard to know what that look is. You know, it's not, uh, you know, most people have at least an idea of what that is. And they were they loved it, in terms of, like, they absorbed it like sponges, honestly. And they loved I sent them each their own little you know, document, PowerPoint, whatever it was, a little slideshow of inspiration and how I connected it. So if I took a screen grab of Lucy with her kids, and I put a picture of something comparable, or even had some sketch, you know, I have a sketch artist, we do something to show how I imagine Nicole or Javier in that particular scene. And it's first of all, it's very useful to me because it's like organizing my thoughts and my ideas and putting them into like a little idea bank. And then I can communicate it to actors. And I, of course, sent it all to Aaron first to sign off on it to make sure that I can send this to actors so that he knows what I sent them. And and that is actually, communication is very important, obviously, but sometimes it doesn't happen as with as much fluidity as it should. And so I have learned, like, just tell everybody everything you're thinking, just get it all out there so there's
Sure.
so yeah.
Well, listen, I mean, we've sort of reached the end of the interview time, and this has been, I can't tell you how much fun it's been to speak with you. This has been fantastic. I could keep you here. Everybody I talk to, I want to keep here for hours, but you know, I don't want to. You've got better things to do than talk to me. But before I let you go, I kind of wanted to get wrap it up by, first of all, we never delved into your past, and I'm curious a little bit about. First of all, were you a movie lover when you were growing up?
Yes, but I didn't have a lot of movie experience. I grew up in a small town in Ontario and in Canada. And one of the first films I saw, kind of by Cinderella, the animated Cinderella, was very important to my costume career. I didn't know that until I sort of, but I thought about it a lot when I was a kid, and I drew it a lot, and I only sort of thought of that a few years ago, and I was like, I think that's probably had something to do with it. But
well, it's got one of the great dresses in cinematic history in it.
And also like all the little mice and the birds helping make the dress and everything. I loved that idea that you could do that with little critters. But I think I saw To Sir with Love by mistake. My mother took us to see, I don't know, My Fair Lady, and instead we saw that. Or anyway, I just couldn't even believe that could be a movie. And when I was in college, I was a history major and then a film studies major. I wasn't a production. I didn't go to film school, but I sewed a lot, and disco era, you could sew something and go out. You could just whip something out.
Were you in New York then?
No, I was still in Canada, and then I moved to New York after I graduated college to go to FIT and study fashion design, because I was sort of enjoyed it, and I had made a visit to New York and had stayed in an apartment across the street from FIT, and I just couldn't believe there was a school that you could go to for that. It was just eye-opening. So I came back to do a one-year program in design and merchandising, and when I graduated, it's a one-year program, so when I finished it, I didn't really want to go. I wanted to stay in New York. You're just getting the hang of New York after a year. But I wasn't that crazy about the fashion industry. And weirdly, I thought it would be different. And I had a friend who was working at a theater company. As she was kind of an assistant in the casting department. And she suggested I should consider costume design. And I really, I hadn't even thought of such a thing. And I worked at Circle Repertory as basically an unpaid intern, and I learned a lot right there, and did a lot of one-act plays, and sort of just loved it so much. And I had, of course you read Shakespeare, you read a few plays in your English classes and so on, but I had never read a script with the idea of clothing in mind. And all of these one-act plays we would do for their director's lab were just completely different from one another, completely different characters, and I learned so much about it, about costuming. It was like a little boot camp or something. But it just sort of led to other theater jobs and meeting other people, and someone needing someone, and I would just be there. Or so I feel like I loved what I did. It was just a light bulb going off. The first thing I ever did was like glue hair onto a Neanderthal man costume. And I thought in a basement of a theater, and I just thought I'd arrive, you know? So it is something that you have to really, you know, love to do, because it's hard work. And, you know, these big films we do now, you know, there's so much management and scheduling and logistics, and you know, there's just a lot. And, you know, you need to be, you know, prepared for that. and if you, you know, experience really contributes to that and really helps you. So I, from those days to today, everything that's happened has somehow, you know, built the career. But my first film, I really was just, it was an HBO film, and Bette Davis was in it. And I was technically, you know, I was going to be her dresser, but I didn't even know what a dresser was really. So, but you know, I was just the costume assistant. But and it was on location in Georgia, and I just couldn't believe you could get paid to do that. And then, you know, so and you know, I met Miss Davis, and that was pretty. I just thought, oh, look, you work on movies, Bette Davis is in them. You know, I know now how incredibly remarkable it all is, but that was, you know, I knew I was on the right path.
Is there any bit of, I mean, I'm putting you on the spot, but is there any bit of advice? You know, there's a lot of, the world is so changed now with people, images, Instagram, all of the different social media platforms. And now we've got influencers, people like you said, the beginning of the Kardashians, and how so many people are looking at fashion and images, and they're so fleeting and fast, and yet the design of these images, the design of these clothes, and the design of putting people in clothes is still an art form. And it takes discipline and understanding. And a lot of people talk about how, I've heard a lot of costume designers say they spend a lot of time in museums looking, like you had said earlier, looking at paintings and light and fabrics and those kind of images. What are some of the, maybe the advice, well, any advice you could give to people that are aspiring to a career in fashion and design?
Well, for costume design, I feel like life experience is really important. I mean, of course, everyone looks at Instagram and other social media, and there is a lot to be gleaned from that. But it's not the same as knowing it deep down. And I find visual cues everywhere I go. And I whether I walking through a city, I feel like walking and looking is a big part of my particular process. I found in Los Angeles, all that driving, I found it limiting somehow. I would prefer to, you know, to somehow encounter the public more, and it's somehow easier to do in other cities. So, you know, in London, I'm in London right now. It's fantastic for that. There are endless, and museums are huge for that. Any of that sort of any kind of gallery or institution that can show you life from another time is valuable. And it's also, and for the future. And, you know, all, you know, it's just to say you go to a museum, it just suggests so many things, and it's really true. You can see, you get a lot from that, and you know, and cities like London and New York and Paris, they all or Washington D.C., and they all have, you know, people who are in politics, people who are in legal profession, they're artists, you know, and there's entertainment, and there's theater, and, you know, all of those things, I think, sort of help you create kind of a visual pool in your head, and you need to have that to draw upon. I mean, I can't tell you, like, if how many times I'm thinking about a script, thinking about a character, and I might see something, and I'll just sort of I can hang an entire costume on that thought or that one visual clue that I just saw somewhere. I mean, you know, uh, one of Lucy's dresses when she has her first date with Desi is a it's sort of it was of course built, but it was based on a beautiful Vionnet dress. Now, the costume designers who might see this will know who I'm talking about. But having a history of costume and fashion that you can reference really quickly is really important.
Mm.
And also, this is also really important. Social media will not teach you how to identify a fabric. You have to feel it. You have to understand its physical properties. You have to know how to drape something or how to cut something or sew something. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but you need to know how it's done, because you cannot work with a room full of tailors and cutters and seamsters without knowing how it's done. I mean, an architect has to, you can't just build a house. They have to understand the structure and where the electricity needs to be and what the heating system has to be. You need all of those things. You don't have to do them yourself, but you have to know how it's done.
Yes.
And I feel like that's something that I am amazed at when people don't know how to sew a little bit or how to fit something on someone and to understand the physicality of the body and the costume. And so that is really that is something I really encourage people to know.
Those are fundamental to what you do.
Yeah.
And so often people don't. I find that true in a lot of the entertainment business, especially with people coming up, that there's not a lot of fundamentals that are understood, and you need those fundamentals in order to build not just a career, but build the work that you have to eventually end up doing. So
if you know how to do stuff, you can learn how to do more stuff.
Right.
It just is. It's like, so, and now, a lot of, I have never designed a superhero costume, but I know a lot about making things, and I know a lot of, should that day come, I could learn how to do it because I know how to build things.
Right.
So this is that's kind of what I think I'm getting at. Yeah.
Well, Susan Lyall, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. This has been a rollickingly fun conversation, and I very much appreciate your time and having you here on the Designing Hollywood podcast.
Thank you very much.
I got to ask you one more last thing. Is it true you're going to be working on The President is Missing?
The President is Missing. We started it and shut down in COVID.
Okay, because I got to tell you, that was a 2-sitting book for me. I read that book in 2 sittings. Because Bill Clinton, he wrote a novel, The President's Missing. Hey, you got to read it. It was one of those things where I'm like, okay, I expect a good pot boiler or at least an airport read. I love that. I love that book. I tore through it. I mean, it's not high art.
No, it's not literature, but it was with David Oyelowo, and we had filmed about 5 days of the pilot and really only had 9 days left, but we shut down on March 13th of 2020 and walked away. So, it's not to say it wouldn't come back, but
well, I'm a fan.
Yeah, I think it's still on my IMDb.
It is. That's why I asked. I was like, I thought it shut down, but it says it's in pre-production. I'm like, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Don't always believe the IMDb.
Yeah.
Well, listen, your work has been exemplary. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I want to thank you very much for being on the podcast. It's been just terrific.
All right. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed talking to you.
All right. And likewise. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Once again, I can't tell you how much I love doing these podcasts. I want to thank our lovely guest, Susan Lyall, for her time and her stories. What a talent. And I'm so privileged to have spoken with her today. I'd also like to thank our sponsor for today's show, Fox Studios Costumes. With an extensive array of costumes and textiles from all eras, the Fox On-Lot Warehouse provides costumers an opportunity to turn their ideas into works of art. A special thanks to our producer and founder, Martika Ibarra, and of course, our co-founder, legendary costume designer, Marilyn Vance. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification button. And you can find the Designing Hollywood podcast wherever you get your podcasts, also on iTunes. Follow me, Robert Meyer Burnett, on Instagram, on Twitter at BurnettRM, or find me on my own YouTube channel, The Burnett Work. Thanks for watching. We very much appreciate it.